It's the second of 3 debates we are hosting leading up to the November 3rd election. This one for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Tonight we are joined by the 2 candidates for that seat, Republican Tiffany and Democrat Tricia Zunker. And we aim to help you get to know these candidates a little better over the next 60 minutes. Because of COVID-19, our setup is a little different tonight. In order to ensure proper social distancing, we're spread out in the Newswatch 12 studio. There's no audience here tonight, though. In addition to airing on Newswatch 12 right now, we're also live streaming this debate on Facebook. So feel free to give your thoughts, suggest some questions if you like. All right, first, quick background on each candidate. Mr. Tiffany, the Republican, is seeking re-election after winning a special election for this seat earlier this year. Before that, he served in the Wisconsin legislature and owned and operated wilderness cruises on the Willow Flowage for 2 decades. Ms. Zunker is the Democrat nominee for this seat. She is the WI-07 School Board president, as well as an associate justice for her tribe, the Ho-Chunk Nation. Now tonight, unlike some other debates you may see where a moderator asks one candidate one question and then another candidate a different question, I'll be asking both candidates essentially the same questions. They'll each have 1 minute to respond, followed by 30 seconds each for rebuttal. We'll alternate who goes first, but before those questions, each candidate has 1 minute to provide an opening statement. Ms. Zunker won the coin toss. She may go first. Ms. Zunker, you can begin.
All right. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, WJFW, for hosting this important debate. My name is Tricia Zunker. I am the Democratic candidate for the Wisconsin 7th Congressional District. I was born and raised in Wausau. I grew up in a strong union household, and my mom is a USW Local 2-224 member to this day. My grandpa was a dairy farmer in Marathon County. I come from humble beginnings, and I know what it is like to live paycheck to paycheck. I am a first-generation college graduate. Then I went to law school. I practiced law for a number of years and now serve as a judge for my tribe, Ho-Chunk Nation, and serve on the Ho-Chunk Supreme Court. I teach law and ethics classes at 3 online institutions, and I'm school board president of the Wausau School District. I'm also solo parent to an amazing 10-year-old son. I'm running for this seat because I am a hard worker, and I will make a difference here so that you have real representation to make sure you have affordable health care, economic security, protected Social Security, rural broadband, and protection of the environment. I know that we are more alike than we are different here, and I'm looking forward to working hard for all of you in Congress.
Representative Tiffany, you also have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Justin, and Channel 12 for hosting the debate this evening. And I just want to thank all of you for the privilege to be able to represent you in Washington, D.C. for the last 5 months. As a farm boy from western Wisconsin, where I grew up with my 7 brothers and sisters, to the small business my wife and I operated for 20 years, my wife Chris, and the 3 daughters that we've had the privilege to be able to raise right here in the Northwoods. What an honor to represent you out in Washington, D.C. But I have to tell you, the House of Representatives, led by Nancy Pelosi, is not giving good leadership for our country. We need changes in the House of Representatives. We need good legislation to be able to pass. And that's the vision I'm going to share with you tonight. My staff and I, we've been able to get some good things done here over the last 5 months. But I'm going to give you a vision for leadership that's different than the defund, dismantle, and destroy agenda of Nancy Pelosi. I really look forward to this debate tonight with Ms. Zunker.
All right, in the first section of this debate, we're going to focus on COVID-19. Wisconsin is a recent hotspot. The Department of Health Services reports we are averaging over 3,000 new cases a day over the last week. Hospitalization numbers are way up. Deaths are also up, though not as much. Governor Evers issued a statewide indoor mask mandate. Most local law enforcement have told us they can't or won't enforce it. Republicans are fighting it. So basically, first, are you in favor of the mandate? And if not, what measures do you think are appropriate to try and stop the spread? We begin with Mr. Tiffany.
Yeah, so the coronavirus is our immediate challenge, and the virus is real. We all need to take it seriously and do everything we can to defeat the coronavirus epidemic. One of the things I did, I think it was in fact the last bill that I voted on in the state legislature, was to give Governor Evers more authority to be able to accomplish things necessary to make sure that people can have that bridge to get through this difficult time, including allowing him to move people around with the Department of Workforce Development so that they could get their unemployment benefits. The governor has not done that. He has not used some of those tools that were offered to him. And so I believe that we need greater leadership from the governor in regards to this issue. But I also think that we need to make sure that we hold China accountable for what they have done here in the United States.
Ms. Zunker, you have 1 minute. Are you in favor of the mask mandate? And if not, what measures do you think are appropriate?
I am in favor of saving lives. Today we had a record number of COVID cases in Wisconsin, over 3,800 COVID cases reported today. Wisconsin is a national hotspot, and I wish that people would follow the CDC guidelines of wearing masks, practicing safe social distancing, reducing travel to necessary travel, and washing hands frequently, because we know the science tells us that this reduces the spread of contagion. However, there are too many people that have failed to practice responsible behavior. We need to see this from our elected officials as well. Just last week, my opponent hosted an indoor campaign event. It was without safe social distancing, few masks, and this was very concerning to me, knowing that I was going to have to be nearby within the 14 days, just like we all are in this room right now. We know that it's not safe, and this is not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. This is an American health and safety issue. We need to come together and we need to wear masks to reduce the spread of contagion.
Representative Tiffany, you have 30 seconds for any additional thoughts.
The virus is real and we need to take it seriously. So let me give you some context to what my opponent just talked about. I was at an event where people were having food and drink, and also the picture that she saw, I was answering questions at that point. And so people can hear me clearly, I did not have my mask on, but I was also socially distanced. I take this very seriously. I socially distance whenever I can. I always carry a mask with me to use in indoor locations, and I probably wash my hands about 10 times a day. I make sure that I do protective things for the people that I'm around.
Ms. Zunker, you also have 30 seconds.
Well, again, I'm just going to make a plea to everybody to please wear your masks. We want life to resume to normal. We want our small businesses to be operating at full capacity. We want our students back in school and our teachers to be safe. And that's going to require wearing masks. And I don't know why my opponent is pointing to China when the situation that we are in is because of Trump's total failure of leadership. We have 218,000 Americans dead and 218,000 American families grieving as a result.
Well, COVID-19 has also taken an economic toll on our nation. Lawmakers in Washington have been unable to reach a compromise on a second round of COVID-19 relief. So what do you think should be done to help people and businesses struggling right now? What would you like to see in the bill? We'll begin with Ms. Zunker.
Well, my opponent believes that the most important thing Congress can do this year as it relates to COVID-19 is to protect businesses from lawsuits from their employees. I believe the most important thing Congress can do this year is to protect lives and keep everybody safe. So there are a number of measures that we can do. It is inexcusable that we are 9 months into this pandemic and we don't have enough PPE for our frontline workers. We need to increase testing. We need to make it free and accessible, especially out in our rural parts of the district. We need to have hazard pay for our essential workers. We need to extend benefits for our unemployed workers who have lost their jobs due to COVID-19, and we need to have funding and support for our small businesses and family farmers so that they can stay afloat during this time. No one should lose their home. No one should go bankrupt because of this avoidable pandemic.
Representative Tiffany, what would you like to see in another bill?
So I alluded to the failure of Nancy Pelosi and her leadership out in the House of Representatives. The last bill that we voted on was a $2.2 trillion bill about 2 weeks ago, and it included stimulus funds for illegals. It defunded the police. It gave tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires in New York and California. It proposed to bail out Illinois and other fiscally irresponsible states, which would redound on us in Wisconsin here, where we would have to pick the tab up for those states that would get bailed out. That's what we saw from Speaker Pelosi, failed leadership. There's a much better way. There's a bill that I support, $138 billion to extend the Paycheck Protection Plan that especially would hit hard-hit industries, especially hospitality, hotels, restaurants. That bill would be an easy bill to pass if Nancy Pelosi would just offer that leadership. And my opponent can discredit what has happened with China. They did not do what they were supposed to in alerting the world about the pandemic that they unleashed from Wuhan in China.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
First, I would like to remind Congressman Tiffany that he represents the people of Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District. And when you use words like illegal, that is very disturbing to a lot of people, including myself here, who you do also represent, because no human being is illegal. Now, when we talk about failure of leadership, the failure of leadership comes from the Trump administration. They knew in January that this pandemic was real. They ignored the science. We need to listen to medical experts. We need to listen to the scientists as a source of decision making, and that wasn't done. And that's why there are so many lives lost today because of the Trump administration.
Representative Tiffany, you also have 30 seconds.
Yeah, 2 quick notes. January 31st, President Trump took decisive action, closing travel from China. Who criticized him for doing that? Joe Biden, the person that has endorsed my opponent. She talked about criticism of lawsuits. As a school board president, she should perhaps talk to school board administration, because I've been talking to administrators around Wisconsin here, including in hospitals, and they're saying they need protection from lawsuits so that they're not sued and stopping their operations from being able to go forward.
Works that way. You mentioned schools. Representative Tiffany this summer introduced a bill which would have blocked federal funding for schools that chose not to open in-person classes this year. Ms. Zunker, you're the school board president in Wausau, which started the year all virtual, though they do plan to switch to in-person classes soon. I'll keep this fairly open-ended. What are your thoughts on the back-to-school debate? We begin with Representative Tiffany.
Yeah, the bill that I introduced was to incentivize schools to get back to in-person schooling. We know a few things about schools. One, in regards to kids, they have very minimal risk. In fact, the head of the CDC, Dr. Redfield, said in August, children should go back to school, and also the common cold and flu are actually more deadly for children than the coronavirus. We should get kids back into school. And that's what I was attempting to do, was incentivize that. And I think it's just so important. We're going to leave a generation of kids behind if we do not have them in school. Plus, you have kids that are, 15% of kids do not have a good rural, or do not have a good broadband connection. Also, kids with special needs. I've been in schools where they have kids with special needs, and they're not being served by virtual learning. We need kids to be in school, do it safely and responsibly, but I believe our schools can do that.
Ms. Zunker, you have 1 minute. Your thoughts on the back-to-school debate.
Because of the total failure of the Trump administration to address this pandemic, it has fallen on local county health departments and local school boards to manage a global pandemic. Representative Tiffany's first act in Congress was to introduce legislation that would withhold federal funding from our schools if they didn't physically reopen by September 8th. This was a magic date pulled out of the air, not based on science or anything. No matter where you stand on pandemic measures, our children and our teachers should not be held hostage. As school board president of one of the largest school districts here in Wisconsin, I know firsthand that we need more federal investment in public education, not someone who takes it away. We currently get about 10% of our funding from the federal government, and that goes to children with services for disabilities and low-income households, like free and reduced lunch. These are some of our most vulnerable students. So my opponent's very first act in Congress was targeting our most vulnerable children. That is unacceptable.
Representative Tiffany, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, it's important to incentivize schools to get back into session. I believe that's very important. But take a look at my record. Take a look at my long record in the legislature, where I voted for increased school funding, where I voted for the rural broadband program, helped expand it to where it's over $40 million now. So our children, as well as others, have a good broadband connection here in rural Wisconsin. I have a long record of helping fund education. The important thing, though, is to get kids back in school. My opponent has she heads the only school that has not went back to in-person learning, and the people of Wausau do not appreciate that.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm aware that when Congressman Tiffany was still in the state Senate, his last rating from WIAC, from the State Teachers Union, was an F. So I don't know how supportive of state funding that is. To a couple of points that he said earlier, reference to broadband, This is critical. This is something I would have been focused on. Instead of trying to pass legislation that wasn't going to go anywhere, I would have been focused on expanding rural broadband access so our teachers and students have access to the tools that they need. You didn't do that, Congressman Tiffany. You voted no on the Moving Forward Act, which would expand rural broadband access.
All right, we've talked a lot about coronavirus already. When we come back, we're going to dive into some other issues as well. You're watching the 7th Congressional District Debate on Newswatch 12. Welcome back to the 7th Congressional District Debate here on Newswatch 12. Again, I'm Justin Betty. We are joined by Democrat Tricia Zunker and Republican Tom Tiffany. Mr. Tiffany won this seat during a special election back in May. Wisconsin made some news earlier this year when Jacob Blake was shot in the back by police in Kenosha, leading to massive protests and violence in that city. So what kind of police reform would you like to see, if any, and how do you feel about the protests? We begin with Ms. Zunker.
Yeah, I support the First Amendment right to protest, but when things take the stance of turning into riots and looting, well, that's unacceptable, and I don't condone that. I support our law enforcement, and I'm really glad that you asked this question, because currently my opponent is running an attack ad against me that claims I want to defund the police as a measure of police reform. This is a lie. Nothing could be further from the truth. I support our law enforcement, and I am so grateful for the work that they do. I have a harmonious working relationship with law enforcement in my current elected capacity. In fact, I support more funding for law enforcement. Things like funding for training, federal funding for training on de-escalation techniques, funding for mental health resources for law enforcement, funding for increased body cams. And I believe that in situations where there are officers that are there and don't take action, such as with the horrific George Floyd situation where there were 3 officers, those officers should be accountable.
You'll have 30 more seconds, just a second, but Representative Tiffany, you have 1 minute. Any police reform you would like to see, and how do you feel about the protests?
I will always look to defend the police, not defund the police. It is so important that we support our police. Their morale is at an all-time low. I'm endorsed by 12 sheriffs across northern Wisconsin, Republicans and Democrats. They want to do the right thing. A bad cop, good cops don't like them. They want to get rid of them. I've seen this at the local level where we've had a few bad cops and local people, locally elected people, made sure and they dealt with that situation. That's what our locally elected officials need to do, and that's the failure of Madison and Minneapolis. They did not deal with a bad cop when they had them. But we need to make sure we fund the police appropriately. I support a bill that Republicans have in the Congress that will spend almost $2 billion for additional training for police, 500,000 more body cams, so we make sure we know what happens with those traffic stops. We need to defend police, not defund them.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds for additional thoughts.
Yeah, so Congressman Tiffany has just stated a couple of things that I said. I support our police. I believe we need more funding. I believe we need more funding for training, for body cams, and I have never said that we should defund the police. I believe we need more federal funding. I am confused why, once again, my opponent is running an attack ad full of lies against me. You shouldn't have to lie to earn votes.
Representative Tiffany, 30 seconds.
Yeah, check the documentation on the ad, because we did document. My opponent was protesting law enforcement a few years ago, long before it became fashionable in 2020. My opponent served on the state board of the ACLU, where they want to let violent felons out. They called for that in the middle of this pandemic back in April and May, to let violent felons out. My opponent has a record, and we have documented it. I will always support law enforcement.
Representative Tiffany, you told us when you were running back this spring, one of your first priorities in office would be to try to take the gray wolf off the endangered species list, and you have done that. It's still very early in the legislative process, but you have supported this bill. Why do you support the bill? And then we begin actually with Representative Tiffany. Why do you support the bill?
Yeah, so I introduced that bill. The commitments that I've made to the voters, what I say that I'm going to do, I'm going to follow through with that. I mean, look at the recent information that came out in the Wisconsin Outdoor News about the wolf population now is 20% higher this year than the previous year, which it has been escalating throughout the last couple decades. We're finding that hunters are not having the same opportunities that they should have. Very good article in the Wisconsin Outdoors News just this week about hunting opportunities are hurting us up here. That hurts our economy as well as agriculture. Our farmers do not have, when their herds are threatened, production goes down and jeopardizes their operations, as well as people just letting their pets out. They can't do it anymore because they're fearful of wolves. It is time to bring control back to the states and allow them to manage the wolf population, not a federal government that's incapable of doing it.
Ms. Zunker, what do you think of the bill? Would you support it?
Yeah, but first I'd just like to point out that my opponent continues to lie about me, saying check the facts. You are referring to Standing Rock and the protests there, and I would like to remind my opponent that the majority of Wisconsin's 11 federally recognized tribes are located in the 7th Congressional District, and it's a good idea to be familiar with concepts like tribal sovereignty and treaty rights. Now, as it relates to this proposed wolf bill, this is nothing but grandstanding. This doesn't help the people of the 7th Congressional District. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services experts have already said this is something they are working on. There's no need to do this, and it's not looking like it's going to pass in the House either. But when you say that our farmers are threatened, in 2018, of the 3.5 million cattle that were in Wisconsin, there were 33 deaths by wolves. So our farmers have been threatened, but it sure wasn't by wolves. It was by Trump's trade wars.
Representative Tiffany, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
My opponent is missing the point. Yes, there were a few cattle that were left. It's when they disturb the herd so much that it reduces production. When production is reduced, they're no longer profitable, and it drives farmers out of business. We need to delist the wolf. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they may be able to accomplish it. What's going to follow that? A lawsuit right away. My bill is much better because it prevents radical environmental groups from being able to come back and get the wolf relisted. This gets the wolf delisted, and it allows management at the state level. There will continue to be management. The wolf belongs on the landscape, but in an appropriate number with the states doing the management.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm so confused by calling environmental groups radical. I mean, clean air, clean water, and protecting our beautiful lands from corporate greed isn't radical, although I'm sure the mining companies that funded your previous elections will agree with you, Congressman Tiffany. So this bill is unlikely to pass. It's also unnecessary, according to the experts at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. What this is a waste of time and taxpayer money. I wish that Congressman Tiffany would be focused on helping our families with COVID-19, helping our workers, and making sure everybody has health care.
All right, time now for getting another quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk health care and some other hot topics. You're watching the 7th Congressional District Debate on Newswatch 12. Welcome back to the Wisconsin 7th Congressional District Debate here on Newswatch 12. Again, I'm Justin Betty. We are joined by Democrat Tricia Zunker and Republican incumbent Tom Tiffany. Ms. Zunker is seeking to become the first Democrat to win this seat since 2008. The U.S. Supreme Court is scheduled to hear oral arguments on the future of the Affordable Care Act a week after the election. So to the candidates, what is your vision for health care in this country? We begin, I believe, with Ms. Zunker.
Yeah, this case before the Supreme Court has such immense implications because 20 million Americans could lose health coverage if the Affordable Care Act is overturned. That is 250,000 in Wisconsin, 23,000 Wisconsinites in Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District, and I certainly hope that it is not overturned. I believe that we need to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. We need to make health care more affordable and accessible for people. We need to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions stay protected. If this lawsuit, if the ACA is dismantled and overturned because of this lawsuit, People with pre-existing conditions will either lose coverage or have to pay significantly increased costs because of their pre-existing condition. My opponent doesn't think that people with pre-existing conditions should have protections. I disagree with that. I mean, take COVID-19. If somebody has coronavirus and recovers, they're going to be deemed to have a pre-existing condition. They should still have coverage, healthcare coverage, throughout their life.
Representative Tiffany, what is your vision for health care?
Affordable, available health care starts with choice, competition, and transparency. In regards to pre-existing conditions, I urge all of you to look at my record when I was in the state legislature. I voted to protect people with pre-existing conditions. You can check the record. It's there. And I will do the same thing at the federal level. If the Affordable Care Act would be struck down, actually, whether it's struck down or not, I believe a much better way to go about covering people with pre-existing conditions is what we had in Wisconsin until the ACA outlawed it in 2009. That was a program called HRSP. 80,000 people in Wisconsin were on that program, and they got affordable care as a result of that. It was wiped out by the ACA. Let's take federal money and apply it to a state program that will provide coverage for those people with pre-existing conditions. Also, let's advance direct primary care to take the insurance companies out from between the doctor and the patient.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds for any additional thoughts.
Well, we need to ensure that we have affordable, accessible health care for everybody, including mental health care. We need to ensure people with pre-existing conditions stay protected. We need funding for rural hospitals and related services. We need to take on big pharma and drastically lower the cost of prescription drugs. And we need to reinvest in innovation and searching for cures and treatments.
Representative Tiffany, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah. You will see an ad running by my opponent right now saying that I do not support covering people with pre-existing conditions. Check my record. I have voted to protect people with pre-existing conditions, and I will do that. But we also need to cut red tape at the federal level. As I talked about, let's get the insurance companies out from between the doctor and you, the patient. Let's bring doctors back that can do house calls. We can do that if we reduce some of that red tape and allow doctors, including doctors like right here in Rhinelander, who have created their own clinics that bring back the family doctor.
All right, earlier this week, President Trump put out a proclamation recognizing Columbus Day here in America, saying it was in part, quote, to commemorate the great Italian who opened a new chapter in world history and to appreciate his enduring significance to the Western Hemisphere, end quote. It's been a federal holiday since 1972. More than a dozen states, though, and over 100 cities now recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on October 12th. Governor Evers established that here in Wisconsin with an executive order last year. History.com says Columbus has become a controversial figure in part because of widespread use of slavery and violence on who he thought were Indians. So what are your thoughts on this holiday debate? We begin with Representative Tiffany.
The destruction of our heritage needs to stop. I mean, we were the greatest country on the face of the earth in the history of mankind, giving people freedom and opportunity. Are we perfect? Of course we're not. But that's part of what history is all about. We need to recognize that we were not perfect. And when we get rid of those symbols that did great things for mankind, but were also imperfect, we do a disservice to history and to our children. We need to remember those figures that did great things in history, but also remember that they were imperfect people. Let's teach that history.
Ms. Zunker, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, I think when we talk about teaching history, we should teach history accurately and we should teach it fully. Indigenous Peoples Day is something that is deeply meaningful to me. I am a member of Ho-Chunk Nation. I worked on recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day as a community leader in Wausau. I first went to City Council and our mayor at the time for recognition, and then I went to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, and it ended up passing with a unanimous vote. And then I formed a nonprofit to be able to bring back a powwow to the area of central Wisconsin to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. Wisconsin is home to 11 federally recognized tribes, and our history, the history of different tribes, isn't being taught fully in the schools like it's supposed to be under Act 31. This is something I've been vocal on in my capacity as a school board member. And you know, sometimes people forget that we're here. In fact, invisibility is a modern form of racism against Native Americans. And this is very important to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, to recognize the First Nations people. And I certainly hope that my opponent recognizes Indigenous Peoples Day as well, recognizing that he represents many tribal members in this district.
Representative Tiffany, 30 seconds for any additional thoughts?
Yeah, understand what the anarchists and other people are doing across our country. They're trying to destroy America. I mean, think about the riots down in Madison, which was so disappointing to see the mayor of Madison and the governor of this state not take action when we had two of our most iconic statues that are around the state capitol that I used to walk past, Lady Forward, celebrating women's suffrage, us being the first state to ratify that, and tearing down the statue of Hans Christian Heg. And now we just saw the statue of Lincoln torn down out in Portland. This is about destroying our culture and heritage. That is not what America is all about.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I think those statements are exclusive. You are failing to recognize the people that were here first. And I remind Congressman Tiffany that he represents the 7th Congressional District. So bringing up riots and protests in Madison, that's not where we are. We are in the part of the state, the northern third of the state, where the majority of the Wisconsin federally recognized tribes are. And it is high time that there is recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day by elected leaders and celebrating history, culture, tribal sovereignty, government, culture, and traditions of the Native peoples here.
All right, earlier this month, Representative Tiffany, you were one of in fact, you're one of 18 representatives, about 5% of the House, to vote nay or no on House Resolution 1154, condemning QAnon and the conspiracy theories it promotes. The resolution cited the Combating Terrorism Center out of West Point, U.S. Military Academy, saying QAnon is arguably no longer simply a fringe conspiracy theory, but an ideology that has demonstrated its capacity to radicalize violence in individuals at an alarming speed, end quote. So why did you vote the way you did? And we'll start with actually, this is from Ms. Zunker first. So Ms. Zunker, would you have voted to condemn QAnon?
I absolutely would have voted yes to condemn QAnon. QAnon is a dangerous conspiracy theory. It dehumanizes people. It advocates destruction of property. It threatens our democratic institutions. It does not reflect Wisconsin values. It does not reflect American values. I am so puzzled by how Representative Tiffany could vote no on this resolution. He didn't even join his party leaders. In fact, he could vote his conscience on this, and what he chose to do was vote no to condemn QAnon. Instead of standing with the people of Wisconsin in Congress, he stood with this dangerous conspiracy theory. And I know he's going to say, oh, he thinks it's a waste of time and maybe some kind of symbolic vote. We are hard workers here in Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District. We want to see representatives who reflect our values. And I would remind Congressman Tiffany that when he is on the voting floor in Congress, it is to reflect the values of your citizens, the desires and the needs of your constituents. And this vote no does not reflect Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District.
Representative Tiffany, you have 1 minute for why you voted.
I appreciate my opponent answering the question for me. To the previous question, she said, why am I paying attention to Madison? Because those statues of Hans Christian Heg and Lady Forward are part of our heritage and culture. They are owned by us in northern Wisconsin also. That's why it was important to me. I denounce any group that foments unrest and violence in our country. I don't care where they stand on the political spectrum. I oppose them. But that's the final bill that Nancy Pelosi sent us home on 2 weeks ago. We have all this important business to take care of, including helping small businesses in the hospitality industry be able to stay on their feet through very difficult times. The Wisconsin Restaurant Association said half of their members may go out of business here if this continues. We need to make sure that we're voting on stuff that's going to benefit people. That's why you sent me to Washington, D.C.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, when you're elected to represent the people of Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District, then your vote must reflect that. Representative Tiffany was one of 17 Republicans to vote no on this resolution. It had immense bipartisan support. And while he says that he disavows any conspiracy theory, I haven't heard him at any point say he denounces QAnon. I haven't read it in any article, I haven't seen it, and I haven't heard it tonight.
Representative Tiffany?
And I have not seen a denouncement from my opponent in regards to Antifa and the anarchists that are out there. That's the tit-for-tat game that goes on in Washington, D.C. Folks, that's not why I went out to Washington, D.C. and why you elected me. You elected me to take care of serious business. We could have passed a bill, $138 billion, for Paycheck Protection Plan, to extend that to help businesses across America. Nancy Pelosi said, no, I will accept nothing less than $2.2 trillion, driving us even further in debt. We've got a record debt that's going to happen this year, and that's her priority. We can do better, ladies and gentlemen, and you should have that expectation of me also.
All right, time now for another short break. Be right back. You're watching the 7th Congressional District Debate here on Newswatch 12. Welcome back to the 7th Congressional District Debate here on Newswatch 12. Again, I'm Justin Betty. We are joined by Republican Tom Tiffany and Democrat Tricia Zunker. All right, now to some foreign policy. Representative Tiffany, you recently introduced some legislation to end the One China policy and recognize diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So we'll start with you. Why did you introduce this bill?
The One China policy was started by President Carter back in 1979, and it did not recognize what I believe is a duly elected government in the country of Taiwan. And it's time to recognize Taiwan for what they are, an independent country in the world of nations. China has been a bully. They have not been a fair trader. They suppress their ethnic minorities in Western China, in particular the Uyghurs. They have them in virtual concentration camps. They have fomented unrest with their border with India. They have suppressed the people in Hong Kong, which was once a free city. It no longer is. It is time for Taiwan to be recognized as a country unto its own.
Ms. Zunker, do you support this move by Mr. Tiffany?
Well, Justin, I'm glad that you asked him why he introduced this concurrent legislation, because I have the same question. Why is this a focus for somebody who is representing the 7th Congressional District in Wisconsin? We have some serious needs here. Our workers are struggling. Our families are struggling. I don't know why Congressman Tiffany would propose this concurrent legislation that only has one co-sponsor and is going nowhere when there are real needs here. We need things like broadband access. We need to get through this pandemic. This is yet some stunt, some political grandstanding. I don't support this action because it is a waste of time and taxpayer money. We need a representative in Congress who is working to make life better here for the people of Wisconsin 7. This doesn't do it.
Representative Tiffany, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
I had the chance to go to Taiwan 2 years ago. They trade with us. They buy a lot of agricultural products and other things from the state of Wisconsin. I think it's important to recognize them. But let's be real clear. My opponent can criticize me in regards to China, but it is the #1 foreign policy challenge that we have going forward as they steal intellectual property, as they are a rising military power. America needs to pay attention because China wants to make the 21st century theirs. I want us to have the 21st century to be an American century.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds again. Do you support the move? I know it's not a priority for you. Do you support the move, the bill?
No, I don't support this because I'm focused on how to make life better here for the people in Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District. This is concurrent legislation that doesn't have any support except one other member of Congress co-sponsoring it. It's quite frankly a bit of an arrogant move to tell the president how to approach diplomatic relations with China. This is seeking to antagonize China, and we need a representative who is going to make life better here, who's going to make sure that people have health care, who's going to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions stay protected. This doesn't do that.
All right, this year, the Great American Outdoor Act passed through Congress. It was designed to permanently fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, invest in national park infrastructure. President Trump signed this act into law in August. Representative Tiffany, this is a rare one. You broke with the president and about half Republicans on this, voting against the act. So I'll ask you why you voted that way. First, Ms. Zunker, because you're first here. Would you have supported this bill?
Absolutely. This is an incredible bill that protects our ecosystems, our natural resources, our public lands, public spaces, and permanently fully funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I am so shocked that once again, Congressman Tiffany forgets that he represents the people of Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District, because this is legislation that is so important to our hunters, to our anglers, to people that enjoy outdoor recreation. This is something that had immense bipartisan support, including the support of President Trump himself. Yet my opponent did not vote for this, proving how out of step he is when he is in Washington voting on behalf of us, because this is something that we need to protect these lands for our future generations so that they can enjoy our wonderful traditions of hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors.
Representative Tiffany, what did you dislike about the bill?
You voted for me because you expected to have an independent voice out in Washington, D.C. that will not always vote the party line. That bill was ostensibly supposed to be about repairing our national parks. And that's a really important priority. And I agree with that. But you know what the priority of the bill ended up being? Was buying more land. The federal government, which is trillions of dollars in debt, wanted to go out and buy more land. It's much like your neighbor having a house that they can't keep up, and they want to buy the neighboring property, and you end up with two properties that are not kept up. That's what's going to happen here. Our national parks are not going to get the upkeep dollars that they need. The federal government's going to buy more land, and then we end up with national parks that did not meet the priority of this bill.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds for any additional thoughts or rebuttal.
Yeah, Congressman Tiffany is just trying to provoke fear with this massive speculation. This is a bill that had immense bipartisan support and the support of President Trump, because this is something that we can all get on board with. We want to enjoy beautiful parks, beautiful lands, and waterways. And this is something where our hunters, our anglers, and everybody can enjoy the great outdoors for generations to come. Congressman Tiffany did not vote in the interests of the people here by voting against the Great American Outdoors Act. I would have voted in support of it.
Representative Tiffany, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
If you want to have great natural parks, you want to have beautiful natural parks where the infrastructure is kept up, this bill's not going to do it, because the first funding is going to go to buy more land. Now, hopefully some good will come from it, but I believe we could have done a much better job of making sure that the priority number one was to make sure that we kept up our national parks, and then if there was leftover money, then we could buy more land. The reverse happened with this bill.
All right, we have one last short break to take. We'll hear more from the candidates after that break. You're watching the 7th Congressional District debate right here on Newswatch 12. Welcome back to the 7th Congressional Debate. 2024 is also a presidential election year, so let's briefly turn to that. Our question, an easy one: who are you supporting for president and why? We're going to go 30 seconds here, running a little heavy on time. We start with Representative Tiffany.
I'm probably going to vote for President Trump on November 3rd. You look at three things that he's done through his presidency: reduce taxes, reduce regulations, getting 2 for 1 on regulations, reducing regulations, but most of all, getting fair trade agreements for us, especially for agriculture and manufacturing in this country. That's what led to the greatest economy in a generation. And that's going to be the key thing that we need to do as we get through the coronavirus pandemic, is rebuilding America. President Trump is uniquely qualified to do it.
Ms. Zunker, who are you voting for president and why?
Oh, I am riding with Biden. Joe Biden is going to step in on day one and address this COVID-19 pandemic so that we can stop this avoidable loss of life. Like me, Joe Biden wants to make sure that everybody has health care and that people with pre-existing conditions stay protected. Like me, Joe Biden respects veterans and wants to help our military families. Like me, Joe Biden doesn't want to see any tax increase on the middle class. Joe Biden is not going to seek to divide, but he will unite this country.
You two could probably talk about this for a while if you wanted to, but Representative, you have 30 more seconds.
Yeah, if I take 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Joe Biden, on January 31st, when President Trump denied travel from China to control the virus coming from Wuhan, Joe Biden criticized him. It was a month and a half before he came around to where President Trump was. President Trump saved lives by doing that. But I also want to talk about what I'm going to do and what we've already done. I've gotten coronavirus food assistance program eligibility for 2 agricultural producers that did not have it when I came into office, including the ginseng growers. We helped clear away red tape for the Park Falls paper mill to be able to reopen with a $1 million loan. We're getting good things done for the people of northern Wisconsin.
Ms. Zunker, you also have 30 seconds if you like.
Yeah, Trump has been a total failure as president. We have 218,000 American lives lost because of this pandemic. That's 218,000 grieving families. Before he got into office, he paid $750 in taxes. That is unfair. I like presidents that don't try to cheat the system. I am supporting Joe Biden, who will be an American president. Whether you are Democrat or Republican, he's going to work hard for you, just like I'm going to work hard for the people of Wisconsin 7.
We're going to stick with our 30-second answers to this last question. If you are elected in November, what is your first non-COVID related priority in Congress? We begin with Ms. Zunker.
Yeah, assuming that the Affordable Care Act isn't overturned, I would like to see that we strengthen the protections of the Affordable Care Act. If it is overturned, then we have to go back to the drawing board and make sure that everybody has access to affordable, quality health care, and make sure that people with pre-existing conditions stay protected, and along those lines also taking on Big Pharma, drastically lowering the cost of prescription drugs, because Big Pharma is getting away with something here, just overcharging us, skyrocketing costs.
Representative Tiffany, first non-COVID priority.
Yeah, I have a number of things in the queue already. 2 things that I'm going to do is, just as I voted to protect people with pre-existing conditions in the state legislature, I'm going to do the same thing at the federal level. But I have a plan to be able to get money to the states for them to be able to create their own programs that are going to be much more effective than coming from the federal level. The second thing is we need to extend the Paycheck Protection Plan, especially for those hard-hit industries that Nancy Pelosi refuses to help out. We could easily pass a bill, $138 billion, to be able to get people that assistance.
Ms. Zunker, you have 30 seconds.
I really like that we are able to see how somebody represents us for a few months and then get another election, because my opponent has ideas on things he would like to do in Congress after COVID-19, but these are things he could be doing now. Instead, he's wasted time proposing legislation to defund our schools and wasting time on a bill that is unnecessary, according to the experts at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I think that we need representatives who are going to work hard for us. There are things he could have been doing right now, expanding rural broadband access, and he's not doing them. But luckily, we got this synopsis, and we get to vote again on November 3rd.
Representative Tiffany, 30 seconds.
We've been getting work done for the people. I have an outstanding staff that I was able to assemble out in Washington, D.C., as well as in the district. We're getting things done. Ginseng growers are benefiting as a result of the coronavirus food assistance program and the work we were able to do to get them qualified. I'm working up in Superior to help the Twin Ports up there to be able to get Navy contracts. We're looking at being able to get 90 miles of stream opened up in the Iron River in far northern Wisconsin for anglers to have world-class trout and salmon fishing. We're working every day to benefit the people of northern and western Wisconsin.
We have time for about 30 seconds of closing comments from each. Begin with Representative Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you, Justin, and Channel 12 for hosting this debate this evening. And I think you see the clear differences between me and my opponent. And it stems from the same stuff that I've been seeing in Washington, D.C. from Nancy Pelosi and her leadership of the House of Representatives. It's defund, it's dismantle, and it's destroy. We can do so much better. Let's restore our way of life. We can beat this coronavirus, and we will do that. We're Americans. Let's rebuild America. Let's rebuild the American dream. Let's renew the American dream. We can do that. I ask for your vote on November 3rd so that we can get America back up on her feet again.
Ms. Zunker, your 30 seconds for closing comments.
Yes, thank you so much, WJFW, for hosting this critical debate, and thank you to my opponent, Congressman Tom Tiffany, for the conversation tonight. Listen, I'm running for this seat because I am a hard worker. I have been a hard worker my whole life, and I'm going to go to Congress and work hard for you. It means something to me to be able to come back to you and say, I delivered on that promise to you like I said I would. I'm not going to waste your time, your taxpayer dollars in Washington like my opponent, who has proposed bills that won't go anywhere. And unlike my opponent, The way that I vote will actually represent you, your desires, and your needs. I'm going to work to deliver health care, lower prescription drug costs, protect your Social Security.
Not out of time.
And thank you for your support.
And thank you, candidates, for coming, and you at home for watching our debate tonight. We're back here tonight at 10 for more news, weather, and sports, including Friday Night Blitz. We'll see you then.
Tonight's